This is going to be the crappiest video I've ever made because today I'm firing pottery with manure. Manure makes a great fuel for firing pottery with because it burns nice and hot and even. It leaves a nice layer of ash to hold the heat in when it's done. Manure doesn't get all the credit it deserves for firing because, well, it's manure. But today I'm going to go ahead and fire some pottery with manure, and while I'm doing that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the advantages of it, what to keep in mind when you're collecting and using manure to fire pottery. So let's get started. My first tip is when you're going out to fire with manure, bring yourself a bucket or a sack or something to put it in. Because unlike firewood, it's really hard to get a big armload of manure. So it really helps if you have something to carry it in, make less trips going out to collect and coming back to your firing location. Another thing you want to look for is rot. You don't want one that's partially rotted or eaten up by termites or other insects. You want a nice solid cow pie, and you want it to be dry. So in a lot of parts of the country, that's almost impossible to do, right? Around Arizona, these things will lay out in the sun for a week or two and they're pretty dry. Other parts of the country it might be hard, so you might have to collect them ahead of time. Set them someplace under cover where they don't get rained or dewed on and let them dry out a little bit. I was up at Hopi last year. They fire with a lot of sheep manure up at Hopi. And the potter I was visiting had stacks of it up under the eaves of his shed with tarps over it to keep the rain and dew off of it so it stayed nice and dry. And they really treasure their manure up there. I generally make two kinds of pottery. The first kind is replica pottery. That's where I'm trying as authentically as possible to recreate an ancient pottery type. And in that case, I generally wouldn't use manure as my fuel because the ancient people that lived around here didn't have access to manure for firing pottery. There were no domesticated cows or sheep, and there were no buffalo west of the Rio Grande. So they would have fired with wood or bark, which is my typical way of firing. But the second kind of pottery I make is primitive pottery. That's just pottery that's made using simple tools and materials that you collect from the earth. And in that case, manure is a great option. Manure makes a great pottery fuel because it burns nice and hot, it burns slow and even, and it leaves a layer of ash that kind of holds the heat in when it's done. And for those very reasons, a lot of the Pueblo potters in New Mexico and Arizona fire with manure and have for hundreds of years. Another good thing about firing with manure is it's pretty much free, right? If you knew somebody that had a ranch, they probably wouldn't mind if you went out and collected some manure from their property. And the same with public land. If I came out to Forest Service or Bureau of Land Management land and hauled a truckload of firewood home to fire pottery with, and I didn't have a permit, I could get a big fine. But if the ranger caught me hauling manure off public land, there's really no law against that. So manure makes a great option also because nobody really cares about manure. It's not really protected or looked after as a natural resource, when in fact it is a resource that's out there available. Now when you're firing with manure, you still need to preheat your pots in the same way with a primary fire like I'm doing here. You can preheat them with a manure fire. I'm using wood in this case, but I found that the manure fire burns rather slowly compared to wood and the primary fire ends up taking a lot longer. So I usually do my primary fire with wood, then fire the pottery with manure after I've got the pots preheated. If you get any of these humongous mega cow pies, you can use a shovel or an axe and just split it into two smaller cow pies. Man, I wouldn't want to run into the bull that dropped that one. It's a lot like firing with charcoal in that it fires relatively slowly, it doesn't produce a lot of flames, it does smoke a little at the beginning, just like charcoal does, but overall, it's relatively flame and smoke free. When I first started teaching pottery workshops back around 2005, I used to always fire the students' pottery with manure. And the reason wasn't because it was authentic, but because a manure fire is a lot safer than a wood fire. There's no sparks, there's no open flames, there's not a lot of smoke, and therefore it doesn't worry people as much. You can fire it in a more confined area and not worry about the fire spreading. And you know, you're less likely to have people call the fire department on you and things like that, which is another great advantage of a manure fire. All right, so here's the poop on firing with manure. It's a great fuel for outdoor primitive pottery firings because it's cheap and easy to acquire. You can fire it in a relatively small space without worrying about the fire spreading because it produces very little sparks or flame. It heats up slower than wood and it cools down slower than wood, so it eliminates some of that concern about thermal shock. It leaves a protective blanket of ash over the pottery to keep that heat in for a longer period at the end. The negatives on it would be if you're trying to replicate authentic pottery west of the Great Plains in North America, it wouldn't be authentic. And it burns really slow compared to wood. When I fire with wood, it's exciting because you've got flames coming up and everything's happening really fast. And so you're walking around the fire, you're keeping an eye on everything, and it kind of keeps you energized. And it all happens rather quickly. With the manure, it's slow. It's like an hour long and nothing is happening. If you're going to be firing with manure, you better bring a good book to read while that thing's firing because it's boring. On the other hand, you know, if you're older and you find that an outdoor wood firing is just more than you can handle or completely exhausts you for the day, then this might be a better deal for you because it requires less energy on your part to get it done. Now, if you're interested in alternative fuel sources other than wood for firing primitive pottery, I did a video last year about firing with coal, which is another good alternative and has a lot of similarities to manure. So I'm going to link that up right over here. If you're interested in learning about firing with coal, go check that out. Thanks for coming with me today. I'll catch you next time.